Not yet? I'm getting a cue. Awesome. So welcome to my talk called Product Security Shouldn't Be Painful. I've been doing this public speaking thing for 10 years, and it's still painful to me. Especially if you're talking on the last day of the last Derbycon, which was, to me, an awesome conference. It's also my first Derbycon, so who else is its first Derbycon? Awesome. All enjoyed it? Awesome. I think Dave and his crew has done something very special with Derbycon, and I think we can be nothing but thankful. I don't have any slides about me. I also don't have any slides having my personal details, because I don't feel that talking at a conference is about me. It's about sharing information. It's about sharing ideas and hoping that other people pick that up and work with it. If you want my contact details, I'll mention them at the end of the talk. Don't hesitate to walk up after the talk and share your details or ask questions, whatever. The thing I'm sharing today, a lot of people share research that they've spent 3 months, 6 months, a year on. When I was making this talk, I realized that it's mostly a combination of all the experiences that I've gathered over more than 20 years working in IT and in security, because it's a very mixed set of things that I've tried to apply here. It's based on a project that I've did with my company called Wire Security. That's the only logo you will see in the slides as well is on the front, on the first slide. What we try to do at Wire Security is let me track back a little bit. When I started my career, I was just a printer installer for a bank. I installed printers, much like Boris still does. However, I always challenged myself and tried to find things that interested me, but it also put me out of my comfort zone. When I founded Wire Security, I defined what we do as attacking wicked problems. And wicked problems are basically very complex problems that nobody wants to address or can address. Somehow, I always find a way to pull in the right people with the right mindsets and the right skill sets to solve those difficult problems. So we don't just write policies like everybody does, and we also don't do a lot of standard projects. In this case, we were asked by a client to develop a framework that allowed them to implement security in their product development lifecycle. Now, when we talk about products, it's obviously the Internet of Things. Everybody knows that. It's a lot of things that are connected now. And we're talking cars, we're talking watches, we're talking toothbrushes, and we're also talking medical devices. Now, when you see a lot of talks about hardware hacking, it's always, I got this device, I got physical access, I extracted this, the firmware, and then I reprogrammed it, and I did fancy stuff with it. I ran Doom on a screen. Product security is much more complex than just putting a device on the market. It's quite a long process. However, it is not magical. There are standard processes that have existed for ages that are applied within companies to create products. It's not like seven vendors at the same time suddenly come up with a connected camera and they all put it on the market at the same time. The standard process that we're looking at is you've mostly two sources of products. First, somebody or a group comes up with an ID, does research and development, and then testing. The results of that testing flow back to research and development. In the end, you end up with a bill of materials, which is critical if you talk about product development, and also what makes it difficult to make changes after that point. Because you have all the parts that make your product, and making changes after that means going back to the beginning, creating a new bill of materials, talking to your vendors that build your products, that produce them, and make changes to their development processes. And in the end, you have a rollout and your product hits the market, and in many cases, people have forgot stuff and cannot change them anymore. But that's a general process. But there is more. When you start talking to product development teams, there are a lot of rules that apply to the work they do. When it comes to medical devices, for instance, there are FDA rules, there are what they call CXP, and it's just a broad set of compliance rules that they have to adhere to. And what I do first when I enter this type of projects, because in the end, we all have the hacker mindset, the most important thing to me is to understand what the restrictions are that are applied to what those people do. So we learn all the rules, we go through all the regulations, it's a lot of reading. We often also read the RFCs of all the protocols that they are supposed to use. Because once we know what the rules are, we can subtly break them, or we can adapt what we want to implement to how the employees are restricted. And then what is also important to remember, and a returning theme at security conferences is always the user is bad, developers are bad. I would contest that there is no person that walks, or no developer, or any person that walks into a company. Wait, there are not many persons, there are some for sure, that walk into a company and say, today I'm going to write bad code, or today I'm going to develop bad products. They all have good, most of them have good intentions, and we have to understand how they work to make sure that the way they work is the most secure way. Now, in this case, we're working with two main audiences, and I've studied communications a little bit when I was in high school. Understanding the audiences that you're working with is critical to success if you want to change culture. I'm not a big believer in awareness training and security awareness and security culture, because security for me is never the primary thing. You have to apply security within the culture that exists, and there's no such thing as making everybody watch the same standard videos and then hoping that they will all do the right thing. You have to be supportive, you have to be consultative, and you have to understand your audiences. So in this case, we have two main audiences. On my right, your left, there are the managers that are not technical, that are interested in certain things, but definitely not whether there's a vulnerability of CVSS 10. They don't care. They want a product on the market that can make them money. They also don't want to get fired. And then you have the developer, and I used a very stereotypical image there. I'm sorry for that. But they all look like that, right? And they're interested in challenging problems, but also in doing good work. The worst thing you can have when you work with a developer is to be at the end of the whole cycle and be the bad guy that does a pen test and then tells them that all the things they've done are wrong. If you as a security professional or a security team work with your developer, you want to be consultative, you want to be supportive, you want to give them as much information as possible. You also want to limit the red tape. There always needs to be some red tape, but you have to adapt it to what they want to do. Now, the managers, first thing they're interested in is money. We talk a lot about security metrics, and then we see dashboards that say we had so many attacks, we had these and these forensics investigations. They don't care. They are interested in if you are efficient and if you're not spending too much money. If your security processes inhibit them from making money, then you have a problem and not them. The same thing with time. If they are thinking about making a product, they're thinking about getting it to the market as fast as possible. You are thinking about getting it to the market as secure as possible. So you have to align your what you want and try to get as much as possible out of that relationship with the management team. Just a reminder, if you have any questions along the way, don't mind raising your hands. I rather have this as an interactive session than just answer questions at the end or you walking away with questions that are not answered. Now, this guy, and that's a stereotypical developer. In many cases, I've seen processes where they've built guardrails. They've actually not let the developer free, but they would say you can only develop in this language, you have to do this and this and this, this and this and this way. I believe much more in telling them what to do, but not how to do it. So we end up, and you will see that later, with checklists that we share with product developers that tell them what to do, but they're very much free in how to do it. The benefit of that is that you have different development teams within your organization, and they start to share what they have learned and what they have developed, but they still have the freedom to do something different as well, as long as the end goal is reached. Good. What I never want to do is reinvent the wheel. I'm definitely never the smartest guy in the room, and there's a lot of people that have done work before me or before us that have done awesome things, and we need to take that information and try to apply it to what we do today. Maybe improve it, but we're not reinventing the wheel. We're working with what exists right now. So you're working with a lot of technical people, and if you enter an organization and the development team has not been focused on security, they literally have no clue. They know how to develop, but they have no clue how to address cross-site scripting. They don't have any idea how to create a process for secure updates, and they're looking themselves because it frustrates them. It frustrates them because they get pressure from their managers. They have to do more security. They don't know where to look, and they have no guidance. So in the beginning, they start looking at what already exists. We have the OWASP top 10. We have the MITRE CWE, common weaknesses enumeration, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have the ASVS. Now, a lot of most of these things, in my opinion, are targeted at security people. They are not targeted at developers. And developers in this talk is a synonym for product developers. In the end, producing software or producing a product that is physical is not very much different. So they start looking at this, and especially the ASVS is focused on testing on verification, and that's not what their job is. They need to know what they have to do to meet those requirements. So the first step I took in this project is basically break all of those requirements down and make them into checklists. So developers could come to the security team and say, well, I have this and this problem, what do I need to do? Well, check this and this, these and these boxes, and you should be good. Yes? Is there a way to apply that to yes, very much. So the question was if there is a way to apply this in agile processes. So the same thing applies. The slide where I said learn all the rules and then break them. Learn the rules of development within an organization, whether they use waterfall or agile or another methodology, is part of this. And I think the next slide actually covers this quite a bit. So in many cases, I kind of call this the PowerPointification of business. Somehow we always define a process as a linear representation. There's a group of boxes with arrows between them, and there's a beginning and an end. That's not how this works. So what we did here was basically take all the processes that work at different points in time, and understand which processes need which inputs, which processes generate which outputs, and where those outputs are used. Another thing that this allowed us to do is make the process as simple as possible. I work as a virtual CISO for some companies, and there's a lot of clients nowadays that send those standardized information gathering documents. Who has heard of those? Do you send them out or do you fill them in?
I usually fill them in.
Okay. Did you like that? So those 6, if you don't know them, they're basically taking ISO 27001 and they create 300 or more questions that you have to fill in. Now imagine multiplying that with the amount of customers that you have. So for each customer, you're filling in an Excel sheet with 300 questions, which takes you between 4 and 6 hours every time. That's not what you want for your developers. You don't want 300 questions that they have to spend time on, that they could be spending on improving your products. Now back to this slide. I think the most important parts are the second box from the left, and it's quite small on my screen. I was not supposed to move this. 1 second. So we basically created a product security and privacy matrix, which is a set of questions that allowed us to rate the product that they were developing on a scale of 1 to 4. From there, they got recommendations from us or guidance on how to develop or what security and privacy requirements they had, so they could do that from the design phase on. And then those same requirements were used at the assessment at the end, so there's no discrepancy with between what the expectations were. Then generating metrics, and metrics are important for the other audience, the management teams. They want to know what, for instance, the product coverage is. You implement this, and it's not like magically for the 100 products you develop, now you have product security in all your products. Coverage, then the different levels, those are all metrics that were gathered and created into a dashboard for the management team, but also for the product security teams, because if you have multiple products, there is some level of gamification that allows you to drive the product development teams better. If one is doing a really good job, that shows in the metrics as well. And you don't want to be you don't want that to be some kind of cage match, but you want to use that as some kind of driver to improve. Then definitely the pass-fail criteria, using those checklists and reusing those checklists in the verification, are very clear. One of the most annoying things, and I think everybody shares that opinion, is when you ask someone for feedback and they're not answering yes or no. They're not giving an answer, right? That happens with security teams all the time. I think one of the things that is very important is to give clear answers. So if they have a fail grade for their security requirements, you have to give them the feedback that they need to improve. Again, focusing on not telling them what to do, but how. Not telling them how to do it, but telling them what to do. So this moved to basically a spreadsheet, and I hate spreadsheets. It's the easiest representation. If you're implementing this, there are, whether you're using Google Suite or Office 365, there's something like forms in both applications, if I'm not mistaken, that you can use to automate this. So they only have to go to a web page, fill in everything. You get a reminder when it's filled in, and the process is very much automated. You don't really want to send them an Excel sheet and then wait until that Excel sheet comes back. You want to make it, again, as easy as possible. You see that there's not that many questions. We use very direct questions, mostly yes and no questions, that gives an information about what type of product it is, how critical it is for the business, what type of information it processes, and that gives us a rating. that are color-coded on your left. And then I still think this is one of the most ingenious things I've done. I'm actually very proud of that. Color coding. It looks very stupid, but we basically took the ASVS, and we didn't follow the ASVS levels because they are mostly focused on the verification part. But we aligned with the levels that we defined for the organization. And then we color-coded the slides. We split everything up in those different levels. And when we determine that something is a level 1, we send the developers all the green slides. When we know it's a level 2, we send them the yellow and the green slides. And they very much know what to do with that. And that's something that's very, very much appreciated. Actually thinking I'm going way too fast here. Any questions at the moment? Yes?
So when you said earlier not to put guardrails
Yes.
around, do you even go so far as to say use whatever, how loose are those guardrails as far as programming languages and that kind of stuff?
For me, complete freedom. So the question, if I'm repeating it as well as I can, how far do you go putting those guardrails up? What are the restrictions? Do you go as far as not limiting the choice of any languages? Yes, there's as much freedom as possible. I think the worst thing is having a development organization where you say, we're developing all these kinds of products, but you can only use Java. That is one of the stupidest things you can do. If a developer, knowing that they are an expert, just as well as you are an expert on security, they are an expert on development, knowing what the upsides and downsides are of the different languages, and they have to choose what works for the work they need to do. If they are developing a web application in Angular and there is a module that they think they better do in Go, then that's perfectly fine. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%. Yes.
How do you, if you have within the development team, if they have security expertise within them, how do you incorporate that into your approach? Do you have them do this for their team, or do you do this for them?
It depends a little bit on the organizations. Organizations that I've worked with never really had what I then call security champions in their team. I think it's important to have those people. You can identify them on the go. One of the most beneficial things that I've learned working with development teams is to introduce them to threat modeling. And there's a lot of threat modeling courses where someone comes in, they talk about how to threat model, and then they come with a few mock exercises, applications that they've imagined, and do threat modeling that way. The way I do threat modeling training is I do the first 2 hours of training just telling them what threat modeling is, how they can approach it, and then I go into the deep end and they start explaining the applications and modules and everything that they are working on. And then we threat model that. And the effect that you see then is that they immediately start thinking about their own products, and you see different people doing different things, and they apply it immediately. I've done it at a company in Seattle one time, not one of the big companies, but we had a lunch break, and after the lunch break, they were actually threat modeling issues that were reported an hour beforehand, and that's an amazing thing to see. Because, again, those developers don't come in to develop insecure code. They come in to do good work. And if they get the tools to do that work better and not get an avalanche of security issues at the end that they have to solve within a limited time frame, then you are winning. So definitely the security champions are important. One of the main things also is if you start with threat modeling or product security training, you often get an audience of the lead architects and the lead developers. I always ask for a mixed audience. There's nothing funnier than sitting in a room where there is a lead architect and there's someone from QA, and the lead architect is explaining how shit works, and the guy from QA is going like, I know how this works. And then using that information, just looking at the people, it's sometimes very subtle. You have to, there's the guy that is talking, but you have to watch the other people to see how they react, to understand if what he's talking about is true. So that's why I said in the beginning as well, I probably have a wealth of technical knowledge, but I've also built, personal knowledge and knowledge about working with people. Using those skills in these product security or security integration into your development processes is not a purely technical task. It's much broader than that, and you have to understand the organization. So I'm down to my last slide now for the key takeaways. One of your tasks when working with development teams is to build the relationships, not only with the development teams, but also towards the management teams. At some point, there's going to be pressure on you from management, and you're going to be the buffer between that development team and the management team. So the development can do what they need to do, and you can satisfy the needs of that management team. Getting that trust is, especially when you're external as a consultant, sometimes hard. But I usually solve that before we sign any documents. I really need that freedom and the liberty to interact with everybody and to make those decisions together with the organization. If my power there is limited, then it goes off the rails after a month, 2 months, and you feel that you become more ineffective. Understanding the rules, understanding how product development works, and how product development teams are motivated is critical to your success as well. As a security person, you're never the lead. You're supportive, you're consultative, and you're there to help people. If you're the person that says no, then, or the person that only says no, then you are in trouble. And then communication, understanding all your audiences and communicating clearly to the people that you're working for and the people that you're working with is very, very important. I think I've narrowed it down to availability. Those people are very pressured on time, and they need answers quickly. So I have the benefit of living and working in Belgium. I work with teams around the world. So sometimes I jump on calls at 2 a.m. at my own detriment. But if that helps my client to make a decision fast, then I've won as well. So being available and being consultative is also critical to your success. Yes, sir. Yes. I have 2 more slides, but they are not about the content of the conference.
Instead of only shifting left with secure coders, you've got the security team and you've got the regular developer coder working together. Until at some point you can kind of retrain coders to become secure coders and do security by design, write your user stories with security, and even write evil user stories. And it comes down to that very beginning of secure coding where you're implementing security best practices and not moving it down in the sidewalk as it gets more costly. So this is interesting that you can go to the existing companies with the existing configuration of the teams and assist right there without like a corporate, right?
Yes. I'm sorry, but no. So first, I hate the term shift left. Like I said, somewhere in the middle of my talk, the processes are never linear. So there is no left to shift. If you look at the, I'll go back to that slide. It's here. For me, it looks more like a carpet bomb. Security goes everywhere in the different processes, but there is no definite shift left. It's a nice marketing team, but it doesn't help. And you're correct in saying that you want to infect the bloodstream. I've been involved with IC2 for 6 years, training security professionals or building certifications to train security professionals. I strongly believe that we don't need more security professionals. We need more professionals that understand security. And one of the roles that we have as security professionals is to help build those mindsets. So in that sense, yes, we're trying to inject that security mindset into the different roles within the organization and here within the development teams. Yes?
My question was actually back on that same slide.
Okay, I'll go back there. Technology.
For metrics gamification, do you have certain metrics that you have found to be effective, or do you have to vary that by organization?
For me, that is per organization. So the question was if there are definitive metrics that any organization could use. It depends to me. For me, it depends largely on the organization itself, and that's not to say that you have to hire me to find out how that works. I would love that, but that's not why I'm here. No, it also depends on what technologies they are using. There's still a lot of organizations that use Excel dashboards. So how you gather information, how you are able to collect data to actually derive consistent metrics from is critical to define which metrics that you use. The methodology that I've applied since, I'd say probably 5 years, is one called GQM. And it's a shorthand for goal question metrics, where you basically understand the goals of the organization. Then related to those goals, you ask different questions. And then you identify metrics that answer those questions. And that for me is a good approach to define your metrics problem. And then you choose how to present that, whether you use something like, well, you can use Excel, you can use any dashboarding app. You can do that in Jupyter Notebooks, you can do that in R, whatever works for you to make a presentable metrics framework, and most importantly, a repeatable metrics framework. That's what you should use. Any other questions? We still have time, I think. Yes, Alex.
A little bit about what you're doing with threat modeling and those things, how you kind of integrate with that with different security and privacy requirements, regulatory,
Can you repeat the question?
So just in general, through the threat modeling, you know, in only stuff I've seen this a few times lately, you know, how does that change based on like the type of device or what the regulatory requirements may be around that?
So the approach itself doesn't change at all. Whether you're looking at a person or a device or a software, the threat modeling is the same. I think the key parts there are that you when you initiate threat modeling, you don't look at the controls that are there. You try to ignore the controls because you want to identify all the threats, even the ones you think are mitigated by controls that already exist. Then you validate those, take into account the controls. And whether there's a huge regulatory pressure or there's relatively little, that doesn't matter. You just have to understand all the frameworks that apply and then integrate them into your threat modeling process. Good. So I've been in a few talks over the past few days, and everybody did something personal or reminiscing about Derbycon and what it has instilled in the security community as well. So I'm going to ask to cut the